Today's guest is Aaron Pujanandez. He's the CEO of Delta Lima, a firm that's focused on data science and data analytics across the government. And Aaron and I, we met through our shared love of networking within the GovCon space. We've gotten to know each other, even hanging out at a friend's house where we first met. And so, Aaron, I just want to thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
No, thank you for having me, Jeremy. It's shared love of networking and shared love of board games, if memory serves.
That's right. That's right. Well, so for those who haven't hung out with you, talk a bit about your background. Where are you from, who you are, and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So, born and raised Denver, Colorado. Left there after high school to go into the Navy. Why a Denver boy decided to go into the military, nobody really knows. I think I was just kind of attracted to the whole ship idea. Um, Went in the Navy, focused on, well, it was ABH, did flight deck firefighting and paramedic work. So absolutely nothing related to what I'm currently doing now, other than like, the massive amount of drinking that just occurs in the Navy, which is also a part of the networking, as you know, Jeremy. From there, went to college and grad school back in Colorado. Went back home from there and then moved to DC for my first government job, which was with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. So the reason I went over to FERC was during college. I actually went into college getting really interested in psychology, which I think is like the default for people who don't know what they want to do and just like get fascinated with human behavior. And ended up getting really into the math of economics and forecasting.
Mm.
So I actually started at FERC as a economist. While I was there, let's just say I developed more of my nerd edge, specifically as we were looking at forecasting, making projections and stuff like that. That really got me more into a lot of the machine learning techniques that were out there, a lot of the more advanced data manipulation stuff that was coming into play, as well as started getting me thinking a lot about kind of the more strategy aspect. Where are you actually applying these things? Where are you not applying these things? While at FERC, one of the things I did was built up a knowledge management platform, which was part working with individuals to get them to use even basic things like SharePoint, and part also getting the agency, or at least the commission, the office that I was working on, getting its legs under it and how are they managing their data and how are they using that data. So once we were actually able to get people to use SharePoint, we were then able to start putting some NLP models together to help with searching, stuff like that. From there, I left. I went to Accenture Federal Services, where after a brief stint at Postal, I started and ran a data science innovation lab for the agents for the company. At the lab, my job was basically threefold. One was we did a lot of the BD, a lot of the solution development, a lot of the solution architecture. Two, we ran some of the more high impact data science, data strategy projects that were going on, including with your agency, SEC, Jeremy, which was one of my favorite. And then the third one was we built out internal capabilities. So while I was there, I had a lot of fun. Worked at about 60 different government agencies, sold a lot of projects. It was a great time. Left there to join a couple product companies. One was focused on graph analytics for fraud, which was the new hot thing back in the day. And the other was, let's call it geospatial analytics for the DoD, I
Mm.
think is the nice way to say it. Left there and decided to start my own firm last year. Really, the basis for starting this firm is a little bit of what I was doing at FERC has kind of percolated throughout my entire career, which is really how are you working with these individuals to be able to develop things that are actually useful. I got a lot of success from doing that at Accenture. The problem with working at a large company like that is large companies have large appetites. So they need the big, impressive things to go out and do. They want to get on the big contracts, the O&M contracts. A lot of what I focus on is a little bit more of the micro level. How am I actually driving a decision for an individual within an organization and building that tool that's not going to be the $100 million Palantir level tool that's going to deliver all of the greatness, but is going to be more of that small little custom Python model that makes somebody's life a little bit easier and makes things a little bit better. So Delta Lima was really started with the intent of doing what we call it decision-centered design, which we can talk a whole lot about. Decision-centered design the right way within the federal space.
Wow.
Very long intro. Hopefully that
No,
wasn't.
that's fantastic. So, I mean, diving in a little bit, so you chose your program because you didn't know what else to do. I think that's interesting because that is not an uncommon theme with people I get a chance to chat with, that they weren't fully sure what they wanted to do. They just wanted to do something. And I think that personality type of I want to do something is almost more important than what it is you're going to do, because you will figure it out. Would you agree with that?
I would. There's a phrase out there. I'm going to misquote it because I don't remember who said it. But don't follow your passion, but bring your passion with you wherever you go.
Hmm.
I had never once in my life thought that I would ever be somebody who was passionate about SharePoint development for knowledge management. But when you put me in the right circumstance and I was able to see some of the outcomes from it and work in order to do that, I was able to get quite passionate about it. So some similar to what you're saying, I think that there is, and I noticed that with a lot of people. Give me somebody who is like passionate and eager to learn, and I will take them above an experienced individual any day of the week. Because I think there is something to what you're saying is, especially when I'm looking for employees or collaborators, it is that mindset of whatever this is, I'm going to be awesome at it, and I'm going to go and do it. And it's not because like of any like internal ego, but just because the actual drive and the push and the meaning you get from it, I think is this little something extra.
Hmm. Totally agree. Totally agree. And I think FERC must be really thanking you now. If you set up a methodology for them to store data well, I cannot tell you the number of people I've talked to recently who have begun experimenting with LLMs. They probably dabbled slightly with machine learning and AI in the past, but not as many people did that as you would hope had. And so with Gen AI, they're realizing very quickly their data governance was horrible.
Hmm.
And you're seeing things that should have been permission trimmed and you shouldn't be able to see based on who you are. And it doesn't care, right? It indexes it. And it probably was visible through a search engine. They just never tried better
Yep.
searching. So they never saw it. Do you think that's the story for a lot of agencies?
I mean, that's the story. I mean, FERC, I wouldn't say that they have the best data. I think they're doing well and they were able to do it. But yeah, every agency has those issues. Every large organization has those issues. I wouldn't even just say that that's public sector specific. I've worked with a couple of financial institutions. They have the same exact issue. I think one of the biggest reasons is because people, first off, they get distracted by the shiny thing. Everybody wants to talk about Gen AI right now because Gen AI
Yeah.
is the new thing and everybody wants to go chase it. Before that, it was deep learning. Before that, it was, hey, let's throw this in a Tableau dashboard because we can make these visuals, yada, yada, yada. And then you actually get into the swamp of the hard work of what is this? How is this data being managed? How is it getting governed? Where are all these manipulations going for? How do we track our data lineage? All of that stuff. I think even today, people like to talk at two different levels at these things. One, they talk about those really like high level, hand wavy data strategies that you'll see everywhere. Oh, we're going to increase data skills and yada, yada. There's these like very high level, like great aspirational things that are not very, very practical. At the bottom level, they get very, very micro of like, okay, I'm going to take this field and I'm going to do this thing and I'm going to put it over here, but there's never any integration with the other people within the organizations that are doing the same thing. You have one
Hmm.
person who owns one data set who's putting their data dictionary together and it's going to not communicate to this person either. Where I've seen organizations do well is when they get into that middle lane of it, of I want to do this thing for this reason, and then you track back to that data that you're going to need and you govern it for that reason.
Hmm. That's a great point. I mean, I think this is my fifth role agency, so I'm not picking on any specific agency. And I talk to a lot of people in government, and data governance and quality and just understanding how that data was created and why it was created is a big problem. We collect lots and lots of data. We get a lot of data. We create a lot of data. But understanding how it all fits together, certainly there's been a lot of work done over the years with people creating enterprise data warehouses and trying to model that data and map it back to its source system. But I think Gen AI came too soon for most government agencies. We're not actually quite there yet on our data governance.
Oh, I completely agree. And again, I wouldn't even just say it's government agencies. I think it is any large
Yeah.
organization. I have not worked with a large organization yet that has not suffered from those problems. And again, I would say, yeah, you can have an enterprise data warehouse, you can get your data lake, you can do your lake house from your Databricks thing. I got the Databricks shirt on, so well, let's not talk. Let's not throw too much shade at Databricks. I actually really like them as a platform, but you can take whatever particular approach it is that you want to build out the thing that you have. If you're not doing it with a use in mind, it's gonna turn poorly. If you're
Hmm.
just trying to manage for management's sake, it's gonna go poorly. If you're trying to govern for governor's sake, it's gonna go poorly. Unless you actually have that outcome of I am going to use this tool, this data to do a thing, it generally goes off the wild. And most people try to do it. It was like, okay, we're going to manage this enterprise data in this enterprise data warehouse.
Mm-hmm.
There's enterprise does way too many things to be able to get all of that data in that data warehouse, I think, effectively, unless you're doing it in bite-sized chunks. Okay, we're going to manage this thing because this is the thing we're doing. Now we're going to manage this thing because this is the thing we're doing, and we see how this changes from the other one.
So what does that mean for Gen AI and organizations wanting to try to get the new hot stuff?
There's nothing wrong with wanting the good hot stuff. Like I said, Gen AI, we was telling you before this interview, Gen AI offers a lot of cool new things that you couldn't do beforehand, but it is not the solver to all problems. Sometimes you need to be able to think rationally about what it is you want to do and then come up with the lowest cost method in order to do it. I'll give you a great example. I think so there was one agency I worked with. I'm not going to name it just because I don't want to throw shade at anybody. But they had a particular problem. I can't tell you much about the problem because then that would just make the agency readily apparent. But I was working with the CIO over there, and she was absolutely convinced we needed to use Gen AI, or not Gen AI, deep learning, because that was the thing back in 2019. Deep learning to solve this problem. 100% convinced. Told me about it, brought me in. They had this whole big stand up with a couple of different product companies, spending millions of dollars, like iterating through it. How are we going to solve it? How are we going to solve it? The problem got solved by joining 3 SQL tables and running a sum function. Like 85% of the problem was completely solved because you didn't need to kill it with it. You just needed to sit down and think rationally, what is it that's actually causing this problem and how are we backtracking? I think it's very similar with Gen AI. People hear about it from the hype and they think about the art of the possible and the solutions that they could have and like, hey, we'll do it. And they haven't taken the time to sit down and dissect the problem. I think the biggest issue has nothing to do with how our agency is going to take advantage of Gen AI. The biggest issue has to do with our agencies taking the time to diagnose the issue and figure out the right intersection, which may or may not be Gen AI.
Well, and I think Gen AI, people don't realize just because you implement a large language model doesn't mean it can't be purpose driven, that you can't train it for a specific scenario around a specific set of data and make it work for you in that context. Like you said, figure out the business need, figure out the context, figure out the data to support it, and then leverage an LLM to solve that in that context that maybe is not relevant to 80% of the rest of the people who work for that organization.
Yeah, a tool for its use. Sometimes you need to take a highly trained LLM or a small language model, which there's a lot of that out, and build it for this specific use case. Sometimes you just need a logistic regression. Sometimes you need that sum function.
Yeah. Well, I love it. I love it because it's so timely, right? We're having interesting conversations throughout the government, well, DC area, right? Government and industry and companies who are trying to leverage this thing. So it is a challenge for the times. Speaking of challenges, and then maybe it wasn't challenge, maybe it's just something that you could provide your thought on. But looking back through your career, the opportunities you've had, the places you've been, the work you've done, what's something that if we were to come to you and say, where could we improve something? What's an efficiency to be gained in that you would recognize and we're like, man, I wish it wasn't done that way. I wish we applied some thought to that. And I'll caveat that to say we're not trying to say it's number one a problem, that it's like a failure, although it might be. I'm not going to say it can't be. Uh, but also I'm not saying we can provide a solution, the improvement solution today, just in this conversation, but certainly what's something that we should begin thinking about?
So I tend to think a lot more about the human element of that. So in prepping for this question, I was actually thinking about what is the one thing that I've noticed as a trend in my career. And I think the thing that I've noticed the most in trend in my career is when I blatantly do what I'm not supposed to do, I tend to make the best headway.
Hmm.
And I think organizations need to start making a little bit more allowance for that. So the knowledge management project that we talked about at FERC, that was a big uphill battle. It was myself and another individual. We put it together. We said, hey, we're going to do this. And then we just started doing it. Even though we had a little bit of buy-in from senior leadership, we just started doing it. And then we were able to show results. And then people got on board, and that's how we were able to roll it off for the entire office. Similarly at FERC, one of the things that I got very passionate about there was I started one of the first employee resource group they had, something called LFERC, which still exists today and makes me very happy. LFERC is Energy Latinos of FERC. I consider this my first professional success. It was back in 2014. ERGs were all the rage right then. Every agency had gotten a mandate. Hey, we got to do one. I was called into a vets one. They had no idea what was going on, but I was trying to help them out. So me and my friend Virginia Castro just built an ERG. We were told by the EEO Council that we couldn't do that. By the executive director, no, you can't build your own ERG. So we just rented a conference room and we did it anyway. If I showed you on the side of my board right here, I actually still have the poster from it. Because what happened was we did it anyway. People came, it was a big potluck. We got a lot of excitement around the agency. As of when I left FERC, there was about 13 different ERGs. EEO was on board and starting to provide funding. We were actively engaging with people. We were building them up. We were providing a path out there in order to be able to do that. And I bring that up because similar to Accenture, when we started up the lab, oh, Aaron, you can't do the lab. That's not how we were supposed to work within accounts. And I don't want to work within an account. I'm going to just go across and add value here. My big advice for those agencies around there is don't make it so hard or so new for somebody to be able to do that. Now, I'm not saying take every little random idea that somebody has, because honestly, I've had some stupid ideas in my past that nobody should have ever listened to. But I think it's that experimentation, that iteration, and that willingness to be able to support and give and see the value of where those things are, which is true, is where those things go. I have had senior leaders in my life that thankfully have been able to cover a lot of my my overhead for that. I can call them all out here if we want, but each one of those projects I discussed, each one had somebody who was supportive of me being able to go off and do my own thing.
I love it. That's a great idea. You're right. I wish more places did it. My last agency actually did this very, very well. So I'll even say their name, Millennium Challenge Corporation, which most people have never heard of that agency. So I advise you look them up,
I have
MCC.gov.
actually.
They're pretty amazing. They are very data centric, very data centric place. But they had this kind of from the top down, from leadership, they had this mechanism for generating ideas. And then they would spin off they would have a panel that reviewed the end, almost like a Shark Tank. And then they would spin off the idea for kind of prototyping and figuring out how to implement and see what came from it. And not all the ideas would be successful, but many were, because the passion behind them and the well thought, knowing that when you know somebody's going to take it seriously when you submit it, you put a lot more thought into it than just throw some random thing in a suggestion box, right? But I agree. I think more places need to have an opportunity to cross-cut, like you said. I like that. I like that term, cross-cut, because many organizations don't like it when you say, what's going on over there and how can I help improve it, when you don't work there, right?
Exactly.
But there's lots of smart people who just ended up in whatever role they ended up in. And maybe they have past experience, maybe they don't, but maybe just have great ideas. Maybe they're an idea person. So I agree with you. I think that's a great suggestion, that we find ways to break down those barriers.
I love that Shark Tank idea. I would actually might even steal that and maybe start implementing it. That I always used to say when I was running the lab at Accenture, I always used to say I was the dumbest person in the lab, which is probably true. But most of the people, like, so I don't know, I'll give you the same pitch that I gave every person who ever worked for me at the lab, and they could probably recite it by now. First off, we'd always go have a beer, and I'd tell them, like, there's 4 rules to my leadership. Number 1, give people a mission, because people don't like being told, hey, just go be useful. Give them something to do, put some proper constraints around it. 2, make sure that you give them the knowledge and tools to accomplish that mission. 3, make sure that they have the autonomy to make the mission their own. So similarly, what you were just saying, as soon as somebody comes up with an idea, pitches to that Shark Tank, they're automatically going to be passionate about them. This is no longer the job that I'm hired to do. This is no longer my 9 to 5. This is my baby. This is my thing. This is now a thing that I own and that I care about. And 4 is accountability. Similarly to what you just said, nobody wants to work on something that is just going to go and nobody's ever going to look at it, nobody's ever going to read it. If you know somebody's going to look at it, there's actually a very interesting, if I look up the bookshelf, behavioral economics study done by this guy named Dan O'Reilly. I'm probably mispronouncing his last name. But he did this interesting study once where he gave college students $1 for building up a Lego robot, right? He'd give them like a little Lego robot, and he'd give them $1 for every robot they completed. in one of the groups, what he would do is he would take the robot and he would put it underneath the table and give them another kit, and they'd build another robot. In the other group, in the experiment group, what he would do is he would take the robot that they completed, take it apart in front of them, and give it back. Same exact thing. They were building the same number of robots. They were getting paid the same amount. I don't remember the statistic, but there was a very large measurable increase in the number of robots that got built when he would just take it and put it under the table versus break it down in front of them. They had no idea. He never told them what was going to happen to the table. They didn't know if it was going to go to kids, but just the pure fact that it like lived on, it was something that like somebody might see as opposed to just got destroyed for them was already a motivating factor.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I love it.
Just stir it out and stuff like that.
I love it. I love it. That's great. That's a great illustration of that concept, right? And I love studies like that, by the way. I could talk all day on a variety of studies, and especially blind studies like that, where you have control groups and you test out the theory and see what really comes from it.
You got to put the science in the data science.
That's right. Put the science in the data science. So, Aaron, what's coming up for you here in the near future? Do you have anything going on? I know, Delta Lima is still fairly new. I mean, it's not that old. What, anything going on there that you're trying to do?
Yeah, so we're still very much in the get the first couple of subcontracts. We got a lot of different opportunities that are coming up at the end of the year. So it's all very, very exciting. So hopefully the get off the future for Delta Lima is get some of the sun contracts and start being able to actually build out and put into practice a lot of those DCD things. Similar to the behavioral economics story I just told you, putting a lot of those more into practice for how do people actually interact with analytics in a way that is going to be useful and drive those mission outcomes that actually matter. Again, I think people like to think very much at that high level, very much at that, what is it are we going to do? How are we going to drive these things? I like to think at much more of the, yes, let's think about the high level and that strategy, but how do you actually take that strategy and turn it into something that is actionable? How do I actually turn it into something when I can call somebody, pick up the phone on Monday and be like, okay, based off of our strategy that we finished on Friday, this is what we're going to do now. One of the projects that I'm most excited about, I can't name the agency, I don't think, but they actually want us to work with them. It's for a legal-based organization, and it's really just going out and we're spending an entire year planning out the analytics that we are then going to build, which I think is the perfect way to do it. Year might be a little bit much. I would generally recommend like 3 to 6 months. Otherwise, you get like a little bit of analysis paralysis. We're probably going to be doing some prototyping and stuff like that, but it's really going to be starting to define out what is the decisional landscape of that agency. And what I mean by that, you have everybody going into work and those people are making a decision based off of information in order to drive an outcome. How can we look at those decisions, start mapping them out, and start doing exactly what we were talking about with the governance and the management, start manipulating that data so that it drives that outcome. And again, put the science in the data science, rather than just say, okay, well, hey, we're going to build this tool and we're going to use this thing and this LLM is going to be great, blah, 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 blah. How do we come up with those hypothesis-driven metrics for interacting between that person and that data to come up with that hypothesis for how you make that outcome better? How do you actually start building those up into a specific roadmap that you can start iterating, testing, and again, getting those great big ideas distilled into something little and useful that actually goes to a mark? So that's what I'm excited about. We're actually, I'll put this plug in there, even though you already warned me that this was going to come out.
I was going to actually ask you to talk about it anyway, so go for it.
Oh, very cool. So the other thing we want to do is, I'm a nerd. I know, like, yes, I want Delta Lima to be successful, make all the money, yada, yada, yada. But really one of the things I enjoy doing is I just like solving problems. So as much as you and I do networking events and we like going to the ones, they're usually panel focused or there's somebody going to a happy hour. I'm actually starting up, which is hopefully going to be a series. There's definitely one, but it's hopefully going to be a series of networking events called Collavolutions. Really what Collavolutions is intended to do is it's intended to take a problem that is currently being experienced by somebody in the government. Our first problem was given to us by the DHS Procurement Innovation Lab, guy named Scott Simpson, said, help me solve procurement challenges with no and low cost solutions. We're mapping out the life cycle of a CO and a core, sitting a bunch of people from industry at the table to help do design thinking activities to figure out creative ways to solve the problem. Really what we're trying to do, again, is we're trying to get out of here's the panel from the chief procurement officer who's saying yada, 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 agency directive. Not that that isn't important, that is very important, but get a little bit even more to the weeds of, okay, here's an individual procurement officer and here's a challenge that they have getting you out your RFPs quickly. If you can make that easier, you help industry, you help the government, you help the taxpayer, everybody gets better. So just even as a part of basic market research, let's start doing some of these. We want to start doing some of these events to start bringing out some of these issues, to start highlighting them so that people can, number one, get a greater appreciation for the pain and feelings that the people are feeling that are actually doing the work. And number two, actually start coming up with collaborative ideas as opposed to just trying to guesstimate and toss things over the fence.
I love it. Yeah, I was going to have you say it. I know that event will have come and gone by the time this episode goes out, but we will look for those
They can
future
see the
opportunities.
videos. We're going to record it. So hopefully
Uh,
people can see the videos and say, hey, that Aaron guy was either completely right or completely wrong. We'll figure
well,
it
then
out.
I'll make sure to include links when I put this episode out. So, well, Aaron, I want to thank you. It's always great interacting with you, whether it's on board games, networking events, or here on the podcast. So, thanks a lot for coming on the podcast and sharing your story.
Appreciate the time, Jeremy.